We are so excited to have David Grant here with us for this Idea Lab. A little bit about him. He's been serving kids and families for more than 25 years. He's particularly passionate about leadership development within next-gen world for professional staff. So that's a lot of the conversations that I bet y'all are having right now with adult volunteers and especially students. He currently serves children, youth, and young adults as the next-gen pastor at Irving Bible Church outside of Dallas. So, David, man, give us a little bit of your story, what brought you here.
Yeah, well, I got on a plane from Dallas and ended up here in Louisville. It was weird, but I'm a father of four. My kids are out of the house, so I'm an empty nester, which is fun but challenging sometimes. My wife just went back to college, so she's doing that thing, and I have four kids, 26, 24, 22, and my daughter's about to be 21, and that's kind of scary. So yeah, been doing youth ministry for 25 years, and just really love being able to pour in and get to know coach youth pastors, youth leaders, those kind of things. And so it's just a real pleasure to be here to talk about change.
Yeah, and that's kind of an expert. You have a lot of expert advice on like shaking things up and knowing when, where, and why to bring in some change. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, how do you know when it's time to change your ministry strategy or programming?
Yeah, the most effective leaders that I see have a very clear and compelling vision. And Scott Kermode, I don't know if you know that name. He's a guy at Fuller Seminary. He basically says vision is a shared story of future hope. And so leaders have this kind of sense of contentment. They live in that tension of, hey, I love what's going on, but there's a gap between my hope of the future and where I am. And so I think leaders, as they assess, as they listen, I think you've got to be a great listener to parents in your ministry, maybe even a parent advisory team where you're asking for input and help from them. Perhaps having a student advisory team when you're basically listening to the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And letting them speak up and listening very, very well to what's going on in your ministry. I think leaders have kind of a sense it's more of an art than it is a science on when change needs to happen in your programming. But there's a tipping point. So if I have a vision for what I hope the future will hold, and there's a gap between what's going on and what that vision is, then I'll come to a tipping point where you're kind of like, you know what? Maybe it's time to shake things up and move things around.
Sure. So in your own life and the staff that you work with and the ways that you've coached other youth workers, what are some key principles that you use to help lead that change and lead those transitions?
Yeah, I think the first thing as a leader, you need to know how you lead as far as change is concerned. I have somebody on my team right now. Before we change anything in our ministry, I have to give her like a 16-year warning because she just does not do. Yeah, some of you are like that. So I have to give her a heads up, hey, this may be coming. This might be coming. This is coming. So if you're a leader that's very resistant to change, you like things the way they are, then you probably need to push it a little bit more. That's a key principle. I also had another person on my team that was kind of one of these people, if it's not broken, don't fix it. She was kind of like, if it's not broken, break it so you can change it. So I would meet with her and she would have, she had one of those big whiteboards in her office. Do any of you guys have that? Anyway, she had this huge whiteboard. I'd walk in, there would be tremendous strategy and plans on that whiteboard. I would come back 2 weeks later, that would be gone. There would be brand new strategy and plans. So if you're somebody that changes a lot and is antsy all the time, then probably a principle is you need to stick with what you have. So that's a pretty important principle too. Also, another principle is listen to a lot of voices. Be very open to input, seek input. Don't just wait for it and take it well when it comes, but seek it. Go out and say, hey, what is going really, really well in our ministry? What are we struggling with? And be open about that.
So when you take in input, how do you start that discussion? Like what are some practical steps other than just saying like, tell me what's wrong? Or,
right.
Like, how do you practically lead a team into the beginning parts of that discussion?
Yeah, assessment's super important. First of all, as a leader, you have to model humility, vulnerability, being willing to see and to say the things where you think you're weak. And so you create that environment on your team. And then asking specific questions. I know you've probably heard of SWOT analysis, strength, weaknesses, opportunity, threats. That's just a really good open way to kind of go through a process of saying, hey, we have a particular programming. For example, let's say that your small groups are meeting on Sunday nights and you have a sense in which, you know what, it might be better on Wednesday nights. Basically saying, okay, we've got a gap in our vision here. Maybe our vision is all of our high school students are being cared for by a loving adult that's pointing them to Jesus. And you see that gap, and you just start saying, okay, can we serve more kids on a Sunday morning than a Wednesday night or whatever? So leading that conversation.
Yeah, and so throughout the history that you've had
Right.
working in ministry and having all of these opportunities to start transitions and
Right.
make those changes, what mistakes have you made? And let us in on the secret so we don't make
Yeah.
them.
How much time do we have? And so, so I think a very important piece of transition is Psalm 127. It says, unless the Lord builds the house, the laborers work in vain. And I think that sometimes leaders can operate independently of others. I can do that. And operate independently of God. And so if we think of ministry as basically our strategy, where we're headed, what we're doing, it's not a business. We're not working with an organization, we're working with an organism. And I believe if you basically go into a transition and you think, hey, I got this, I've got experience, I've got a degree, I've got whatever, if you're doing it, you're going to do it in vain. So that's the other thing is acting too independently, not leading up, basically not, let me say it this way, underestimating the emotional attachment that some people have to ministry. For example, right now we're thinking about moving our camp from Gulf Shores, Florida, to the beach, to the mountains. And so our high school pastor is leading that change, and I'm trying to help him understand Jesus lives in Gulf Shores to these kids. God has done some amazing things there. Now that can become idolatrous, right? But there's also some really special things about what's happened there. So I'm trying to help him think through the emotional connection that might be in that one room that Jesus has worked there. So,
and we all know that change is not easy. It's
Right.
not fun. And so for those of us that are in the middle of it, give us some hope. Describe a time when it's worked really, really well, and looking back on it, you feel
Yeah.
like you wouldn't have done anything different.
Right. So I've been at my current church now for 8 years, and 2.5 years in. By the way, if you're new at a spot, if you're thinking about going someplace else, there's a great seminar coming up later by Brian Abbey on that kind of change, so you want to check that out. But if you go someplace new, the first thing is don't do anything but listen for a long time. Get to know the context of where you are. And I would say just go through a process, listen really, really well. Take an opportunity to discover what's going on, get input, read a lot, ask other youth pastors, network really well with people around your neighborhood and in your parish. We basically made a change when I got there after 2.5 years, moving programming around. We heard from Kara Powell that our high school kids should be in a worship service, that intergenerational worship service is super important. So we moved small groups, high school small groups, from being during the worship service to being after. And that's a clash of values, right? Because we want every kid to be cared for by an adult leader. We also wanted them to be in the worship service. And we took about 18 months to get discovery, to listen well, to talk to parents, to share that story of future hope, of what we hoped would be better if high school kids, talking about the why is super important. The what about the change is important, but the why are you making a change from here to there, and convincing people that, hey, there's a future hope here that we've got to do together.
Well, David, one last parting word. Do you have any encouragement, any bits of insight that you want to share?
Oh, open-ended, huh?
Oh, yeah.
I like that. Yeah, I just don't underestimate Psalm 127. I think as leaders, especially those of you who are high-capacity leaders and you want to change things a lot, leaders change things. They lead with clear, compelling vision. Do that and do it well, but please, please, please don't do what I do a lot of times and basically try to do things in my own strength, which is silly, right? Because I'm the chief of sinners. I'm the weakest. And so it seems really silly to do that, but I think we have a tendency to forget that it's the Lord that builds the house. It's the Lord who brings the increase. It's the Lord who gives the wisdom to do it. And that means running desperately to Him in prayer and creating a prayer movement before you do any change.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us. Could we give him a round of applause?
Hey, thanks.